Hello, everybody, and welcome to this super special, super exciting workshop. We are going to be editing Victor's article, which thank you so much for sending in all your submissions. I can't wait to see what professional writer and editor and also personal friend Todd is going to be doing with this article. So a first couple housekeeping notes. Go ahead, pop in the chat, say hello, where you're from, where you're joining us. So I am joining you from Boston. It is a warm day here, so I'm looking forward to enjoying some sunny afternoons later.
No doubt. And I'm Todd B from Tennessee, this little bitty town in the sticks called Dixon, if you're in this area. If anybody's heard of Dixon, please put that in the chat. I would be shocked and thrilled to know. I think one time in my I guess creator life, I had somebody who was like, "Oh yeah, Dixon, I know where that is," and we met for tacos in
That's
Franklin,
very nice.
Tennessee. Yeah. It was a good student. We had lunch, and it's a good time. The internet is a magical place.
Very cool. I see we've got Victor himself joining. Hopefully that's the right Victor and not a different Victor. But if that's you, the Victor who's getting his article edited, welcome. So Todd, you've got access to the article, right?
I do indeed. Yes.
Do you want to share it to the screen and we can just launch right in?
Let's do that. Let me scroll back to the top and I'll get it live.
So for anybody who hasn't been to one of these before, which is fair because I think the last time I did this, it was like 2 years ago.
Oh yeah?
Nice. Yeah, with Jordan. Jordan Gross, I'm sure you know who he is.
Oh yeah.
He's a great guy. But his process, I loved watching his process. So we're basically just gonna screen share this. Oh, that's really small. Could you zoom in a little bit?
Yeah, let me this is a Google Docs problem. Let's see. All right. Either we could do it like this or I could ramp the text up. And now seeing the interface that I have to deal with, I'm like, I might just increase. Okay, so we can see it on the screen now. Yeah, like that's legible.
I can see perfectly. Yeah, hopefully
Beautiful.
If you guys can't see or hear, just holler and we'll figure something else out. But the process was so cool working with Jordan last time. And I'm really excited to see what your process is like and how you tackle editing articles.
Yeah, sure. So it's very much, when I do this myself, it's very much a back and forth process, right? I don't think that I have a clear, okay, I write just this and then I stop and I move on to just this and then I stop and I do just this. Like they do all blend together, but there is like a series of steps whenever I'm teaching it or whenever we talk about it that's concrete. So I'm going to share those first for everybody just to be kind of familiar with that, knowing that when you try to execute on this, it won't go as smoothly as it seems. I'm very wary, Zulz, of like, I don't know. I think when you write on the internet or when you do anything really, like when you do anything really well, someone comes up and eventually like asks you to kind of explain how to do it. And your first thought is, well, I have no idea. Like I did this thing and then I did another thing and then I like repeated this process for 10 years and now I just do it. This is how I do it.
Yeah.
And so the framework and the teaching takes a long time to get exactly right. And it's never as cut and dry as it seems. Like experience and practice and putting in your own habits is a part of it. But for me, editing is kind of like a 4-phase process. And sometimes it happens all at once. And some of it is generally automated these days.
Oh, like with Grammarly or something like that?
Grammarly is the main tool that I use. For what it's worth, I mean, we both know Tim Denning. I work with him closely. He is always on the lookout for new stuff. And he thinks that Grammarly will be, if they don't add in more AI capabilities, Grammarly will probably be like dethroned by a startup AI company. I don't know. I think they'll probably be quick enough to be on it. And I'm curious. I think since they're already in so many writers' hands, that'll be pretty easy for them to go instead of, just correcting this word. It's like, choose how you want this to sound and integrating
also,
them.
As a writer who's gotten used to using Grammarly for 3 years, it
Yeah.
would have to be an amazing
Oh,
plugin for
totally.
me to abandon Grammarly. Like it would have to be miles and miles above where Grammarly is,
Yeah.
just because I've gotten so used to that workflow.
The cost of switching, right? Like
The
mentally is
friction
just,
so
oh
high.
yeah,
Yeah.
enormous. So that's a battle that they would have to fight, I think.
But
And while
yeah,
we're here, yeah, before we get started, do you use, I know you've written about AI, and this is going to be a hot topic for everyone here. I think the AI conversation is nowhere near running dry. You write about this. Do you use anything right now? AI
yeah,
tools?
I do. I
Okay,
do.
what do
I
you use?
use ChatGPT because I've tested
Sure.
a bunch of them, and in my opinion, they're all either the same or worse as ChatGPT, the free version. So I might
Yeah.
as well get
Yeah.
it for free. I use Midjourney as well. I don't pay for it. I just search in the backlogs to see what other
Yeah.
people have created to
Uh,
illustrate my blogs because I like the images they'd make. I've
yeah.
used it not for writing because I love writing. That's why I'm a writer. If I outsourced it
Totally.
to a robot, what's the point? I
Yeah.
do use it sometimes to do like quality control. So I'm like, okay, here's my article on, I don't know, this topic. What am I missing? Or like, what should I include?
Yeah.
Or sometimes if I'm struggling to think of an example, I'll like paste the paragraph I have above and then I'll write, for example, and then I'll ask ChatGPT to continue. And then normally it comes up with something half decent or something I can punch up. So I use it in those specific circumstances. And frankly, I use it more for client work, not for my own blog, because again,
Yeah.
I'm writing on my own blog for my personal enjoyment and fun.
Totally. Yeah, of course, of course. It's like the process of writing helps you think more clearly, or at least that's how it is for me about whatever it is that you're interested in.
Mm-hmm.
It's an exploration of whether personal or like, I don't know, technology or some idea that you're trying to flesh out. That's it for me. And
Mm-hmm.
so going to Chat GPT and saying, "Hey, write a 400 word blog post about Notion and whether I should use it or Rome Research," that doesn't really help me understand the thing, right? So
Yeah,
that's interesting. I think we're on the same page about that. I don't know how
definitely.
we got. I don't know how we got there. Oh, we were talking about Grammarly.
Edit. Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
So I'm actually so excited to hear that you have a quantifiable 4 phase
yeah,
editing strategy. So,
yeah,
because I love a framework.
totally. Okay, the framework I think is going to be very, very helpful, probably for you and definitely for everyone chiming in, just because it is a framework, right? Like most of us come into this and we're going, all right, I need to edit this. Well, let me take it. Let me take it a step backwards, even, right? Because most of us don't even do that, right? Like we get
Yeah.
all excited about writing on the internet. Maybe we do like one of these 30-day challenges. Maybe we just get on a whim and write a blog post one day and post it somewhere. Most of us don't even think edit unless you have been trained in editing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, a small portion of people. So it's not clear what steps exactly to take in the beginning because you just think, oh, I should probably make this better, but you may not know like exactly how to do that, right? So for me, it's first is the pre-edit, and that's kind of cheating. I'll come back to that. Including it in the process is kind of cheating. I'll come back to that in a second. But then after the post is written, the pre-edit is before the post is written. After the post is written, it is the power edit, and then the proof edit is last. No, sorry. All right, two is all right. Here we go. Pre-edit, point edit, power edit, and then proof edit. I always forget the point, even though that's generally the most important one because it kind of gives your blog posts a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And most people don't have that. They just write a nice thing that happened, and there's no clear north star
Mm-hmm.
of the metaphorical north star of the post itself, right? So the pre-edit is something that happens, like I said, before you write the post, and you're just kind of fleshing through ideas yourself. Often this just happens subconsciously. And
Yeah,
it
this
and
is,
it
I think, the only
right.
kind of editing I personally do.
Totally, totally, right? Because as you write and as you grow as a writer, you kind of, especially now with all the instant feedback we get through the various likes, comments, shares, whatever, you gain this sort of sense of like what makes a good post to begin with,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whether it's a headline or a story or a hook or whatever it is. So that's the pre-edit. And you can do this if you're on the line, you can do this like, I don't know, in a concrete way if you don't have the kind of like that sixth sense in your mind tuned up yet, like Zuli
Mm-hmm.
does, more so than me. like Zuli does, you pretty much for probably 2 or 3 years, I would write 10 ideas down on a piece of paper and then just pick the one I was most excited about. So instead of just like stopping at that first idea, what that 10 ideas thing does is it forces you to get to a point where you kind of run out of things and then you go, oh, what's next? And that extra thinking kind of clicks in, and that's keeps you from grabbing the first idea, because usually
Sorry, I'm confused. So is this with editing or is this with ideating?
This I call it the pre-editing part, right? So it's more ideating, probably.
So this is before you've written the article at all?
Oh yeah.
Totally.
Totally.
I see. Okay, right.
Totally. Yeah,
so
because
at this point you're still thinking of what to write about.
Yeah, I think yes. Thank you for clarifying. I added in there because it just saves time, right? Like to me, that's one of the points is not having to guess or iterate so often. Again, I work with Tim. He doesn't guess, but he also writes a bajillion posts every week, right? Because he has that drive in him. So pre-edit is before you write. You're clarifying the idea and you're trying to get clear on that. The point edit is where you say, okay, what is this article really about? What is the message that I'm trying to drive home? And there's an exercise for that as well. We can talk about it later, but probably after we look at the article, it'd be a good time to get into that. But you're essentially deciding what is the one single message that I want to drive home within this. Point 3 or step 3 is the power edit. And with the power edit, that's where we do all the stuff that many writers are drawn to this in the first place for. Like us romantic types, I'm including me in that. I don't know if you're in that group or not, but we romantic types read a book when we were 12 and we were like, oh my goodness, that is the most beautiful thing I've ever read. I'd long to write stuff like that. Then there's a gap because when you try to write stuff like that, it doesn't, like, maybe you can write one sentence and you'd say like, the green grass flowed down a hill like the emerald waterfall. You'd be like, bam, nailed it. Love that. But it's isolated. Like, what do you do with that sentence? And then finally the proof edit, which as we hinted.
Sorry, hang on. So going back to the power edit, what exactly does that entail?
The power edit is you said the phrase punching it up, right? For ChatGPT, that's what you would do. So the power edit for me is usually making the story more dramatic.
Right. I see. From a literary perspective, you're saying.
Totally.
Got
totally.
It. Okay.
And you can feel that. Again, there's like a sixth sense that you develop. And people who read a lot are very good at this. Like I've met people who didn't write anything online, but they would just like, I coached them for a little while. But in their first attempt, they were just objectively better than many other writers. And I couldn't figure out why. And I was like, oh, you just read
a lot.
Like you just read. Whereas on the other hand, somebody really wants to write and they send me things that are terrible over and over and over and over and over again. I can't figure out why. It's because they didn't read. Like they didn't read.
Yeah, so you kind of get that sense just from emulating and absorbing content. Yeah, for sure.
Totally.
I say content, reading books.
Reading words wherever they are. Yeah, 100%. And I think one issue with sessions like this, and one reason I don't do a whole lot of them, is because there's a limit on what can be taught in writing.
Yeah.
Like we can teach you techniques. Like I can look at this piece and I probably will say something esoteric at the time. And your job is to stop me when I get too far off the deep end. But I may look at a sentence and say, okay, this really needs, this sentence needs parallel structure in order to pop. And what I mean by that is you should have two sentences in a row that kind of match, but only change one word, right? So an easy example of this that everyone knows, roses are red, violets are blue. What does that mean? Nothing, but we remember it instantly because of the structure of those sentences. It's a choice to put those in there, right? And every author, what's interesting is as you get further and further down the technique rabbit hole, you just find the same things, like from Shakespeare to Gladwell to Cardi B. Like there's a finite set of things you can do with the English language that increase the
The
drama.
stickiness or the
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, the
yeah. That makes total
musicality,
sense.
the whatever it is, and that's what all of those things I kind of lump into
The
power.
power.
It's
Okay.
it's probably a bigger section than it's probably deserving of 2 sections, but there's a lot in there that is just you have words on a page. Now you really want them to pop off the page. How
Mhm.
do you do that? And sometimes it's adding things, sometimes it's taking things away, right? Because
Mhm.
that's part of the challenge as well.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
finally, proof is a super boring, like now mostly automated process. People like me, like I had a dad who was an English teacher, right? So diagramming sentences was a thing that I did for fun back in the day.
Nerd.
Just
I hated
yeah,
those.
totally. But to me, that's what made the most. I was like, oh my god, like this. It was like the Da Vinci Code. I was like, oh my gosh, knowing that this is an article, the next thing is a noun, and that that's a verb. It opened the world to me, and I think everyone listening, right? The thing about grammar is I don't think it helps you write sentences, but I do think it makes you much better at fixing them, right? So if a sentence has a problem and I don't really know what it is, but I know that it's wrong, that's where grammar comes in handy because you can say, okay, I see what's happening here. The subject and verb don't
Don't
match,
agree or
right?
whatever. Yeah.
Right. So
You've got an orphan pronoun. Yeah.
the finer you sharpen those tools, it's just handy to have. Unlike, say, I promise I'll get to the article in a minute. Unlike, say, vocabulary, which I don't think is worth studying at all. I
Okay,
don't.
interesting.
I
That's a
don't
hot
think this.
take.
This is something that and I'm coming in with the power of Stephen King here because this is something he wrote in his On Writing memoir,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that big book. He talks about vocabulary being a shelf in your toolbox and that you should never make any attempt to improve it at all. Like you should never go to a thesaurus or a dictionary to try to find a word that you want to put in it. Reason being is because many people will kind of flub the substitution because they don't understand the full meaning of the word,
Mhm.
right? Like, so a lot of times, and I think everyone on the call will have experienced this, like you're writing a paragraph about birds, right? Like maybe it's a metaphor or something. I know you love birds, so that's
I
why
do.
that's why I chose that. But you say, okay, the bird flew up through the trees and circled around the branches. It dove downward toward the fish, the unsuspecting fish in the river below. And after a while, you get tired of saying the word bird, right? Because you're like, okay, like I don't want to use this word again. So you maybe just like go to your thesaurus and you swap it out for aviator or like like something. I'm struggling to find even a good word to swap out for bird because bird is the word,
Mm.
but that's the problem with many people using the thesaurus because they've never seen the word in context, right? They've just seen it isolated. So
Yeah.
sure, if I go to the dictionary and I look up a word, I have an example sentence, but the sentence is made up to fit the definition of the word. It's not within the context of a paragraph, certainly not within the context of the story. So I would much rather someone come in with a, like, I don't know, 6th grade vocabulary and just roll with it
I
than
mean,
try to
yeah, I think
replace.
there's always a point where it's like you want to be talking to the people you're talking to. And
Yes.
I do, okay, so I disagree with you. I think there are
Awesome.
points that where that extra word, that extra level up from what most people expect or anticipate, that itself proves a point that says something about your article, about the topic that you're writing
Totally.
about. But 90, I would go so far as to say 99 times out of 100, you're absolutely right. You don't need to say avian when bird will do just fine. Like, who are you trying to impress?
Yeah.
As K3 Ann Keem says, some people really do be trying too hard. So I 100% agree with that.
100%. 100%. Because and so to be clear, I'm not talking about, so there's some advice that goes around in the writing circles that I absolutely despise. And it's always something to the tune of like, keep your writing at a 3rd grade level. And I'm like, excuse my French, But like, fuck that. I don't want to talk to third graders, right?
Yeah.
Like, why would I want that? I want to have a conversation with adults. So if I want to use the word ineffable, I'm going to use the word ineffable. And I think that's your point, right? Like, selection of the word can put the article in a certain area and attract certain people. What I don't think is that if you just heard me use the word ineffable and then you go look up the definition without having kind of read that word in context, I think that's where it gets scary.
Yeah.
Because now you're not natural,
You've
right?
lost you've lost something at that point.
100%. 100%. I think the ultimate goal, and this is impossible to reach, and that's kind of why it is what it is. The ultimate goal is to kind of be, sit down and express yourself as naturally and as clearly as you possibly can.
Yeah.
I think that's the best writing. And I think that's why writing is so exciting and varied, right? Like, we don't all have to write, and this is important to say, 12 ways to hack yourself to success in 12 months. Like, no, like if that gets you going, absolutely. But if there's a story like this, when your daughter gets diagnosed with autism, 100% tell that story.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that goes for the type of stories you do, right? The pre-edit, the selection process, all the way down to the words that you choose. I think it's a very, the more honest you can be, the better. And I know that's very theoretical, but that's how this is a guy who's done this for 15 years. So he thinks about things that are way too unnecessary for the average person. But yeah.
No, I think it's a fair point. Like, and it's a lot of people try to emulate what they see online because they see it's successful, but it's so easy to miss the fact that they're successful because they're genuine, right? Not because they're writing about whatever's trendy at the moment, but because they're writing from the heart. They're writing about something that they really care about, and they're writing about it in a way that feels natural and normal to them. And that's why people resonate. Like, it resonates with people and readers.
Totally. Yeah, totally. And there's so much room for that. All right. So let's get into this article since I've ran it for 20 minutes. Hey, I've also just noticed the tab in the chat where it says comments and not just private chats. So what I would like everyone listening to this right now, I don't know how many people we have on here, I would love to know what you want to learn today. This is usually how we start our master classes with Tim. I want to know what you want to learn, because this is a very specific kind of topic. And so, of course, I can ramble here, and I'm happy to do that. This is my favorite thing to talk about. But just pop into the chat and tell me what you want to learn today. Like one specific thing.
There's like a 10-second delay, just so you're aware.
Okay. There's some delay on ours. We use a Webinar Jam, but it depends on the day. So it's like you never know when the chats are going to start hitting.
I went through a phase where I was streaming stuff to Twitch, and I didn't realize there was a delay. So I'd be like, hey, everybody, sound off if you can hear me and see me okay. And then there would be like 20 seconds of dead silence in the chat. And I'd be like, oh, no, I've messed up again. But I got there in the end.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, chats are probably the most anxiety provoking part of being live, because sitting in the silence is.
Oh, I really maybe I've just been really blessed. That only happened a couple of times on Twitch. Other than that, normally I've got a lot of really fun, interesting comments, thoughtful comments. Truly blessed to have such a cool audience.
Yeah, they are. No, I can already tell. All right, so let's see what we got here. We got K3N. I'm going to read that as Kian, just for my convenience. Want to learn how to write headlines.
Always a good one.
Love to see how you use white spaces and format paragraphs. And that's a great question. We'll do that here. How do you use sentence structure to make the writing pop? Great. Best ways to promote your writing, if we get around to it. Not that interesting to me, to tell you the truth. I think, let me say it like this. Zuli is much better, right? Let me say it that way. Zuli will be able to address that a lot better than I can. I can speak to the headline, which I argue is part of promoting your writing, right? Because you're not doing it. The headline's doing it for you. But yeah, that is a good question, and one that you should ask Zuli or Tim. Let's see. Nat says a solid system for easy/fast editing, how to start, where to stay longer, tricks, etc. Love it. How to get perspective in editing when you're so close to your baby, you think it's perfect.
Oh, been there.
Do you still get that, by the way? You've been doing this for a while. Is that still a thing?
I've gotten to the point where I recognize those signs and then I send it to other people and I'm like, do not spare me. Tell me what's wrong with this article. Like I had one recently where I was going really flowery in the introduction because that's like, that's fun for me to write.
Totally.
I got some people who are like, you can keep some of this in, but probably get rid of most of it. And I was like, okay, fine.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah,
I love
definitely
it.
struggle with
Yolanda, that's a great question. And I do too. Still, right? Like, still. I was 18 and writing, and I'm 33 and writing, and there's still times where it's like, ugh. It's usually because it's something that I care about, right? Like the closer it is to you, the harder it is to like see it objectively. Lily, interested in why an article doesn't work. I would argue generally editing is part of that. Jeff, most common newbie errors, great. And then Junaid, should I start writing on Medium even if I am not professional and belong to a country which is not included in a list of Stripe payouts? Yes.
Yeah.
Right?
We can cover that again at the end, but yeah, that's a hard yes for me. I'll explain why if we've got time.
Yeah, cool. So let me start. Let's go over here and I'll get into the article really quickly. You can see I have this highlighted. I have my comment over here, which is actually not about the headline, but my first comment here is that I don't love the headline.
So I think just for clarity, I think just to make sure we're on the same page, I believe the headline is My Daughter's Autism Diagnosis. Is that the one you're talking about?
I don't love whether it's that or A Journey Through
Love.
Right. Whether that's the headline or the subhead.
Got it. Okay.
I don't like either of them. And the reason for that is because how to explain this? So first of all, let me make this point. It is genre specific, meaning that where you publish this will matter tremendously as to how you write the headline. I am giving my advice, assuming that we are on Medium or some similar platform where you need almost a very exaggerated headline to get attention,
because you're through the noise,
right? Because so the reason Medium specifically is a good visual, because in Medium, headline shows up first, right? So like if you go to medium.com, you just see a bunch of headlines. You don't necessarily see the author, right? So even if I want to be there to read Zuli's stuff, that's not what I see first, at least as of right now.
Yeah.
If we're in the email inbox and now I'm getting an email from Zuli or Victor in this case that says my daughter's autism diagnosis, I'm much more comfortable with that. Why? Because now we're personal now.
Yeah.
And in the inbox, let's think about it. What do you see first? You scan from left to right. You see the name first. You see the author first. And that's why I think, well, anyways, that's a different rant for a different time. So if we're assuming that this is going on medium.com, what I'm looking for here is tension and or drama.
A reason to click, right? Like,
yes.
Why?
Yes. And I don't mean, so let me grab the keyboard over here. And the laziest way to amp that up a little bit is something like this. That is the laziest way to do it, but at least we have terrible typing. But at least we have some curiosity in the headline because of
what changed. Yeah.
Correct. This I think it's a demonstrative pronoun here, right? It's something that we don't know what it is.
And I want to say a quick point, because this is something I struggled with as a beginner, especially for sensitive topics like this.
Yeah.
You feel like, or at least I felt like I was kind of like pimping out the topic almost just to try to get views. But then I asked myself, well, why am I writing this article? Like, if I'm writing about something that's sensitive and important and matters to me, I want people to read it, right? I want people to click on it and get this message that I'm trying to send them. And that to me kind of helped me work through the like, oh, am I being too promotional about this super difficult, sensitive topic, and come through to the point of like, if I want to share this message that I genuinely think is important, and that's why I've written it, I have to do some workshopping on the title to make sure that those people get the message that I'm trying to give them. And that was just something that really helped me work through this. Like, am I being too salesy versus how do I get people to click?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And that's why I like to make the distinction of like where you're publishing matters a lot.
Yeah,
If
definitely.
there's a group of people in the world, it's very small, that reads what I write because I'm Todd.
Mm.
And same with you, probably a bigger group, right? That reads what you write because you're Zuli. And therefore, if I'm reading because it's you, I don't necessarily have to be intoxicated by the headline, right? If Stephen King sends me an email, I'm probably going to read it, even if even if the
Yeah,
headline
yeah,
is
yeah.
like things I learned from writing. Like there are some instances where the status of the author overwhelms the quality of the headline, no matter what it is.
Mhm.
But for
But I
most of
think for most
us,
people here, yeah, it's
yeah,
just you're not at that point,
uh,
or I'm not at
uh,
that point, certainly.
100%. Yeah, yeah, totally. Hold on. I'm also open in the YouTube page. I was getting an echo of myself for a minute.
Oh,
So yeah, things to consider in the headline at the very basics, because we talked about headline tips. So we'll stop here for a minute. I think at the very basic, you want to create some sort of curiosity gap. And that's why Julie and I kind of pounced on this word everything, because that creates sort of a curiosity gap. Now, it's obvious and expected because the preceding words, like the scary diagnosis, you kind of read that and you go, well, yeah, of course it did. Right. Like,
mhm.
however, um, if it's something like, right now, this is the start of a journey
Mhm.
instead of just a bold, broad proclamation.
Mhm.
It's maybe still a little bit expected, but in my mind, it kind of just goes one little notch above what is like, oh, everything changed for me. You read that and you're like, well, yeah, of course it was just the beginning. I'm going, okay, what does that mean? I sort of still understand that, I think, but if there's something after autism, we want to know what it is.
Yeah.
Maybe it's something completely contrarian. By the way, before I write this, because I know Victor's on the call, we're assuming right now I know nothing about the article. I'm clearly up here on the headline and thinking, how could we make this more exciting? Now we are not only creating curiosity, but we've got something that's so unexpected that it's kind of hard to look past it, right? We're going, how in the world was this supposedly bad thing led to this supposedly wonderful thing? So contrast in the headline. So if you're taking notes and writing things down, I think this is another big principle. Number one is curiosity,
Mm.
create a curiosity gap. Number two is contrast or conflict.
Yeah, like this is something that's true no matter what the topic is. If you
Yeah,
go against conventional wisdom, you're going to get people, you're going to
totally,
get both people. You're going to get people who agree with you and you're going to get people who disagree with you. Whereas if you go with
totally.
the conventional wisdom approach, like everybody's like, ah, I've seen that 10,000 times.
For sure. For sure. And remember, and again, I'll harp on this. This is again genre specific. This is assuming you're writing to people who don't know you, right? And you're not writing on, I don't know, um, a blog solely for people who have autism, right? Because if it's a curated audience, then you can get away with some different things. But if we're assuming we're writing this for quote unquote the masses, we need to reflect what Gene Schwartz, author of Breakthrough Advertising, kind of a legendary writer, called mass desire. So if we're doing that, we got to find the thing that encircles as many people as possible, and that's kind of the trick here. All right. Are we comfortable? Maybe we'll come back to headline stuff at the end. But as for now, I'm pretty comfortable with that, with those two takeaways. Because if everyone listening here like writes those two things down, and then for every headline goes back and goes, how can I make this more curiosity driven?
Mm-hmm.
And how can I add some contrast in here? I think those are
Those are two
plenty.
really good ones.
That's plenty to be going along with. All right. So I'm going to delete that because I don't want you going in with assumptions that that's what's happening here. My daughter's the autism diagnosis. We get here, opening line, always very important. I actually like, so this is interesting to me. I don't hate this opening line. I actually kind of like it. The biggest reason I like it, and if you read my work, this is something you'll find a lot, is because it reverses the order of a traditional sentence. Like you're already in the middle of it, and you almost have you have to read the rest of the sentence to know the subject of this, right? So now I'm thrown into the middle of the story without yet knowing the characters. Since
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I love that first line actually,
Yeah.
because to me, I don't know if this happened to you. It gave me whiplash. I was like, because
Totally.
I'll be honest, Victor, the first,
Totally.
like the first 10 words, I was like, okay, what does this really have to do? And then I got to the last 5 words and I was like, what?
Yeah.
So it really grabbed my attention. I thought it was awesome.
Yeah. And that's the contrast we're looking for.
Exactly.
Honestly, you know, my friend Tim, he describes the first line as like a second headline, because you're still trying to sell people on like, you got me to click. Now, what are you going to say to get me to read? Right. And this really nails the contrast between paradise and something that's often looked at as a huge challenge. So I like this. You could be hypercritical and say, hey, since we're online, we want this to be short as possible, and go boop, right? And make it even a little tighter. But you know, that's not something that I'm going to.
I would actually get rid of the palm trees and keep the sun salsa dances, because I think it adds
good imagery.
Vividry.
Yep.
That's not the word.
Yep.
Vivid imagery.
Vividry. Yeah. It adds vividry. You're correct. So let's do that. We'll keep the edits here just so everybody can kind of keep up, and then Victor will send this to you so you can kind of roll with it from here. Honestly, this and this are my two main focuses when I'm writing something. Like once I maybe this a little bit too, but once I get people past the second paragraph, probably they're in, right? Like they're probably just going to keep on sliding down. There are some things that I want to fix in the rest of this article, but for everyone listening here, like there's an old axiom. It's like if you spend an hour writing, you're probably going to spend 50 minutes on the headline. I don't know if that's exactly true, but certainly between the headline and the first line, these are important things to get right, just because, again, you have this wonderful baby darling story that you want everyone to read. Mm-hmm. The thing that's going to get them to read it, headline, first line. All right. So, city where salsa dances on the waves, an entire family is going to be diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Already shocked. Love the first line. Then we're introduced to the characters. My wife, she's this. Our baby boy, he's that. I'm the dad. I skipped the little girl. She's this. Baby boy, she's this. I'm the dad. Fine. I'm also good with all of this, right? I'm comfortable introducing the characters. If you wanted to, you could also add another kind of tension building paragraph here. Now that's somewhat vague, so let me try to put some color on that. You could, instead of going straight to the characters, you could go here.
I'm taking notes, everybody, by the way. I will share these with everybody after the, after the video.
And just kind of start down the story, right? Like the reason for that is because, all right, I'll tell you a story about this. Once, a couple of years ago, I did this event teaching on storytelling with my friend, Ash Ali. He's this entrepreneur in England. He's exited from an enormous business, and now he's doing an education startup. Part of that was bringing in real experts on their craft to teach to an audience, as opposed to university model. People who may or may not do the thing are teaching individuals who definitely don't know the thing. So I'm preparing my notes and I get everything well, and I have the slide deck, and there's a point in the presentation where everyone gets into breakout groups and they tell each other stories in each breakout group. So we had maybe 20 people on the call. We break into 5 groups of 4. I, as the host, kind of hopped around from group to group, to listen to the different stories. And I noticed very quickly that it was super difficult for me to leave a group in the middle of the story. And it was also super difficult to come in the middle of the story because I'm trying to figure out what's going on. A story creates kind of this vacuum that's hard to break away from. Like once we hear the beginning, once we're in motion, even if we don't know all the characters yet, we want to know what happens next. It's part of the human condition. So if you add this in here, if you add some tension for introducing the characters, I think that's a way to pull people into the story. You actually do that in paragraph 3. And this is the first part where I thought we could do with a little less description because we're flowery up here, right? We've got the imagery of the salsa line. We've got the bundles of joy. We've got the sunshine. We're like metaphor, 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 metaphor. Great. But when the action starts, I want to get into the action. And I'm spoiling some of my criticism for later, but one of the big picture thoughts that I had about this article is that all of the sentences are a similar length.
Okay.
Right?
By the way, we just had a quick question from Aaron saying
Sure.
he wanted to know how much of the article you've read before rewriting the headline that much. So I think you clarified this, that in this particular instance, you were rewriting it as though you hadn't read the article. But typically when you, because I personally, I write my final headline after I've written the whole article. So I'll write the article and then I'll spend like 10 or 15 minutes coming up with headline variations when I like self-edit. So I'm keen to hear how you do that.
I think the answer to this question is something along the lines of what makes a good headline. And the answer to what makes a good headline is the same as the answer to what makes a good sandwich, which is essentially it was what you expected it to be. I think this is an important distinction to make, especially in the era of clickbait, because there are many people, and this is something you kind of have to shift your mind around. I don't think you can practice your way here because Zuli, you pointed out again, when you're writing your stories, they are craft. They are art. They're precious, one of a kind, unique things.
I certainly think so for my own articles.
Of course. Yeah, that's why you do it, because you think it's important to say. Headlines, I think, are very much science because it's what gets the audience in the door. But if we think all the way through that logic and we think back to the sandwich example, you have to deliver on what you promised. And if you write the headline and then your article wanders and ends up at a different conclusion, there's a loss of congruency, right? Like there's a rock in your sandwich, and that's a problem. So you either, rock's probably the wrong. So, okay, let's say it's a peanut butter jelly sandwich. There's a pickle in your peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It's unexpected, right? But if you go back to the headline and say peanut butter, jelly, and pickle sandwich, you might not get as many people, but the people who get in there,
they're know expecting it.
Exactly. They know exactly what they're getting. The reason listicles work so well is because it's so clear what you're going to get when you click on the thing. 12 quotes to motivate you to get up earlier in the morning. What am I going to get with that? Oh, it's probably 12 quotes, right? Like so dumb and simple. And they're just waves of vapid nonsense with headlines that have a structure exactly like that go viral. Why? Because it's exactly what you expect. So to answer the question, that's the long answer to the question. I do the same thing as Zuli, right? Like I have to know kind of what the big insight is at the end, and then I'll go back and tease that in the headline, right? Or if it's not an insight, because this is a story memoir kind of thing, what the main point of tension is in the story, and then that's what gets teased in the headline, because every story has tension, right? Like that's, anyways. All right, every story has tension. I'll dive into that a little bit later because that's part of this. Aaron, I hope that helped, by the way. Pop it to the chat and tell me if that helped answer your question. This is what I do.
It's mostly just pickles versus no pickles discourse in the chat currently.
Excellent. I love that. I'm comfortable with that. If you remember, at least that'll help you remember what we talked about a little bit more. If you could think of pickles. All right, so we've got the first line, comfortable with that. We got the second line, I'm good with the characters, or you could flip to just starting in the story.
Mhm.
You could have this. The one way we could slice this up is you guys are all in the car. And then as you're in the car, you're like looking in the mirrors around the car. And that's what gives us the introduction
Gives
to
us a
each
bit
of
more of
these.
scene setting. Yeah.
Correct. To my right, or in the passenger seat, this person.
Yeah.
I flick my eyes into the rearview mirror and I see this, and then I see this, right? Because
Mhm.
now we're rolling along literally while we're meeting. There are two things happening. The action is going and we're meeting the characters at the same time. That's probably what I would do if I was doing this from scratch. All right, so what we're doing now, we're driving by, we're in the car, our destination, a place that would answer questions that have been whispering in our ears for a while. I like that ending as a kind of internal cliffhanger.
Mhm.
It sets it up very nicely. As we drove, my mind was a busy street. So what we're doing here is we're trying to aggravate that tension. What will we learn? How will it change us? Okay, this is a power edit thing. So sadly, I did what I predicted, and I gave you these nice structured things, and I'm blending them all together here just because that is how that works sometimes. My brain really, 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 really wants a third question here.
I
Really?
am also a big proponent of I call it internally, the triple punch. I love it.
Yeah,
3
yeah.
examples, 3 questions, 3 fragment statements. I use it all the time.
Yep. Yep. 100%. Well, it's like, and three is so interesting because it shows up in every field, right? Like the golden ratio or whatever in design is the rule of thirds in
Mhm,
film. It's
mhm.
actually the same thing, which is things that I don't understand. But it's like, yeah, you divide the screen up into thirds. It's those are the parts that you're going to look at, and in writing that applies too. We love the number three: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Like, why do you have to add those things in there? Because you're Thomas Jefferson and you know that 3 things sounds better than 2 things. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not just going to be life and liberty. It's going to be life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the rhetorical figure, I actually like the triple punch, but the rhetorical name of that is a tricolon, right? Like
Oh, I
3
thought I'd come up with
items.
that myself. Well, I didn't think I'd come up with it
Well, you
myself,
did. No,
but
you did. You came up with that name. And that's that's what I'm saying. It's like, oh, we didn't invent anything. We just thought we did. Because it's what feels right, right? And this is important like kind of sidestep because one thing you can do if you're looking to improve your writing, somebody asked about like a quick fix or a quick way to edit faster. One
Mhm.
way you can improve your writing across the board much quicker than the average person is to learn rhetorical figures of writing, like learn the patterns of good writing and then go, oh, okay, like I'm going to write a tricolon here, even if you don't know why it works or you don't have like the finely tuned senses to understand that yet. If you read up on those devices, then you go, oh, okay, I'm going to throw it in there. The same as if you study story structure and you go, all right, I need a character who's doing something, then he has conflict, then he gets the thing. End of story. Like knowing that structure puts you miles ahead of the average person trying to
Mhm.
tell a story. Anyways, okay. But that's the 3 things. I would like to have a third question here because it feels really nice.
Mhm.
You're building the tension here. I'm fine with that. I looked in the rear view mirror and saw my
Oh,
little
sorry,
girl's
can I make a
eyes.
comment?
Yes, of course.
I think this paragraph is mixing metaphors. I would either go with the ship or the
Mm,
driving.
mm,
I
nice.
like the driving one because it kind of again, it fits in with where you are as you're telling this story. You're in the car, your own mind is zooming, or your thoughts are zooming, etc. Um, so
Yep.
I would honestly drop that, like the
Yep.
whole sentence. I'm not sure that it adds much to the paragraph. And I would
Totally.
probably also get rid of my heart felt like a drum, keeping the rhythm of the unknown, because I don't know what that means personally.
Yeah. Agreed. Where is that? Yeah.
Just, yeah.
Overall, by the way, here's a trick that nobody's going to want to do, but I'm going to say it anyways, just in case there's 1 in 100 faithful and with the time and patience to do this. I actually think the best hack for editing if you don't want to wade through things like this and learn the techniques. I actually think the best hack is to write the whole thing once, wait a day, read it over again, and then just start all over from scratch and write it again. I think
I've heard that. I guess the theory is what you keep what's important, and everything else that you drop, it probably doesn't need to be there. It doesn't help move the story forward. Yeah.
Two things. What you just said is exactly right. You remember what's important. The second thing is you're just a little bit impatient.
That's a
Because
great
you've
point.
already written it once. So you're not going to be necessarily flowery or redundant. You're going to be like, okay, like you're going to try to get to the end. Probably this story could chop off 800 words or so. I think it's 1,800 words right now. And so rather than me, like we could scroll down here and pick through each sentence. I'm not sure that's the most helpful thing for everybody or even Victor, honestly, because then you're like, oh, I have Todd's thoughts, but I don't know how to take my editing skills forward. The reason I get on these weird rants like this, because I know people take it, even if they have a document of edits that I've done, I would much rather you know how I think than what I think. Because if you know how I think, then I'm not a bottleneck to your improvement anymore.
Yeah.
And you can go, okay, I know exactly why I'm making these edits, even if it's subconscious, and I could do 1,000 of these things.
Yeah.
Right? You don't need an edit. I think writer and editor should be. I do think editors are necessary, but I also think writers have to be very good editors. So, yeah.
I've made a note. I think you're right. I don't think I would ever have the patience to do it, but maybe one day if there's a very important piece for me, that is going to be a great, painful, horrible, very useful hack.
Totally. Taika Waititi, I think that's his name. Taika Waititi, who is a film director and writer, won an Academy Award for the movie Jojo Rabbit a couple of years ago. His hack is that he'll write a screenplay, he'll put it in a drawer, shut it, leave it for a year so that he forgets it. Then he pulls it back out. Then he reads it. Then he rewrites it all. So it's like, okay, if he can wait for a year, then probably we can wait for a day or two, right? Like that's kind of what I'm thinking.
That makes total sense.
So we're moving on here. You're looking in the rearview mirror. I think this again can kind of be folded into the introduction, right? Like I think these things, you can't see where I'm pointing. I think that this and this can be combined. Right?
Yeah.
I think that you can introduce, you're driving, you introduce everybody, and then you end looking at her because at this point in the story, this is who you're most concerned about. Then you can make your silent resolve, right? Because you're the protector of the family. And that makes a lot more sense. Or it condenses the main points into fewer words. All right, so you're driving along, you're wondering, you make your resolution. Then we have kind of a quote unquote scene change here. And we're in the doctor's office, bustling Miami. The walls are spinning cream, fresh hint of lavender. Fine with this. Actually, you know what? I'm not. I'm gonna stop it here because this is a trend that I think is problematic and is probably my biggest gripe of the whole article, which is that there is no tension whatsoever in this whole recounting. None at all. There's not, like, the car ride is nice. The diagnosis is nice. The doctor is nice. The after effects were nice. There's one sentence later where it's like, school was a different beast. And I was like, yeah, here we go. Here comes the drama. But it was like, so we had to prepare differently or something like that.
Okay, yeah.
And the reason this happens, again, let's think about how I think, not what I think. The reason this happens is because often when we're recounting stories, especially of this enormous personal nature, we come to it from a perspective of having already made peace with it. We've forgotten that at one point when our wonderful daughter was born, we had kind of this vision of what her life would be like. And now we're at this crossroads where, for better or for worse, her life, it does not match the vision that you once had. And there is just monstrous tension in that. There's struggles not only for the family as a whole, but there's an emotional, like, we have to rethink our entire plan for this wonderful person. And that's what I want to see more of. Like, I think every parent is hoping for their child to be happy, and their definition of happiness is often what they've experienced. And so when there's a variance for that, you've got tension. You always do, whether it's a parent, a son coming out as gay to his like super conservative parents, or I don't know, someone who's going to be an artist when all their family is doctors, right? Like those little moments, we make peace with them later because we want to continue the relationship. But when it comes to the story, we as outsiders really need to hear that tension, because that's what we feel.
And I guess what I would say to this, Todd, is you don't have to be mad that your daughter has autism, right? Like that's not a bad thing. But I don't think, Victor, when you wrote this story, you wanted to tell it for a reason. Maybe you wanted to, I don't know what that reason was. Maybe that reason was like, you just want to tell people, if your children get diagnosed with autism, it can be the start of something really great. Like it doesn't have to be what you think it's going to be. Or I don't know if, I'm assuming that's what was the reason, but, or you might've thought like, we were having this problem. And then when we finally got that diagnosis, it was like our questions had been answered. Yeah. So I think if you're struggling to build tension, at least for myself, what I do is I try to go back to like, why am I telling this story? Who am I trying to tell it to? Why am I trying to persuade them? And finding that reason lets me pull back on those emotions that will help me write things that are tension, even as, like you say, Todd, if I've totally made my peace with it. Like I wrote an article a while ago about getting fired, which at the time super sucked. I hated getting fired. That was one of the worst days of my life, even though I hated my job and was, perfectly happy as a content creator. I'd kind of built up this myth in my head of being like, oh, I'm so glad that happened. Like it all worked out for the best. Yep. But then when I was writing about it, I was like, this is very sunny. And then my husband was reading it and he was like, you cried for like days when that happened. And I was like, oh yeah, you're right. I did cry for days. And then remembering that and realizing that I wanted to share the article to say like, if this happens to you, you'll be okay. Like I was, that helped me pull those emotions back up and into my article.
100%. 100%. And I actually think that if you're writing this for people who, we're using autism as an example. If you're writing a story to people who may be going through a similar thing, but you exclude the drama, suddenly they're in their heads like, well, my experience wasn't like that.
That's like, a great point.
Mine wasn't nearly this rosy.
Sunny, yeah.
And that's why, I made that big speech at the beginning about being honest. This is part of that. Like, and it's hard. Like, this is why there aren't that many good writers, because it's tough to go back and remember, like, this was terrible. Like, Zulia had a similar story. And like, I think the day after I was fired, I just like I left my phone on my computer at home and I rage walked 12 miles around the neighborhood just because but that's something I'd completely forgotten until I went back and like checked my notes from that day. I was like, oh yeah, like that's how mad I was, that I knew I couldn't talk to anyone because it was going to be a problem. Right. Yeah. So that's what I want more of in this story. I say drama. I don't think it has to be like in your face drama, because maybe, Victor, maybe your story really was, on the scheme of things, like pretty flawless. But I have no doubt, at least what I said at the beginning about the tension of changing expectations and little disappointments that happen in life, that's all of life. Like that is a big thing that we have to highlight as writers. Otherwise, we're probably misleading the people we write to a little bit, right? And making it sound better than it is. Mm-hmm. So here's what let's do. I'm conscious of time. We're going through this kind of sentence by sentence. What I want to do instead is back up and look at this from a scene by scene standpoint, right? Mm-hmm. We've got the beginning. We've got the doctor and the diagnosis. What happens next is Victor kind of makes his way through what autism is. Here is where I think there's a big chance to build the tension. And also here, well, okay, I'm going to come back to that note because that's not a scene specific note. So he's understanding autism. He's going through that. I actually think that this whole scene can just be compressed into like one sentence that happens through this. So what I think would be a good structure that also saves you some space is you get the diagnosis, maybe the doctor's fine, but there needs to be some, yeah, like this right here. Our sails were set, our hearts alight, and we embarked on a voyage of discovery, love, and endless horizons. That's how you feel about it now. Then it was like, holy moly, I have no way of, yeah, go, Zuli.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, like, even a little bit lower down, you do mention, Victor, that your wife cried, I think,
Yes.
which was a totally
Yep.
understandable reaction, I think, to hearing something like that. And I think you can say that you struggled without cheapening your message at all, because I think, like you were saying, Todd, like if I say I got fired and then the next day everything was perfect, and here's why that should reassure you that you'll be okay too. People
Yeah,
who are reading that are going to be like, well, I got fired and I struggled for a lot longer than one day. They're not
totally.
going to be able to relate with what I'm saying, and they're going to feel like, well, maybe I'm messing up more than Zuli was because she only struggled for a day and I've been here for weeks.
Yeah.
So I think, like, yeah, it seems like you're saying, Todd, there's definitely acknowledgement that there were some hard patches, which of course there were. I
Yeah.
don't think you should be afraid to talk about those or expand on those, just to help other people in similar situations feel like, yeah, I get this.
Yep. 100%. And I'm going to throw a wrench in all of this in a second, but let's just go ahead and finish this story. So, family's response, I think probably your personal kind of reaction gets folded into that. And I would like to see running side by side the immediate reaction of you versus the immediate reaction of your wife. I want to know if you cried or if you just did the what I'm going to call the masculine thing and went immediately, how am I going to fix this problem? Right? Like read, research, understand, like help me understand this as opposed to, I don't know, immediately being empathetic. That's very interesting to me. If we take the diagnosis, which is a shock, it's a bomb dropped in the middle of your life. It doesn't read like that right now. If we take that shock, I want to see the fallout of that. Did you and your wife like fight? Was there tension within the family because you weren't sure how to deal with this? I'm not, please keep in mind, I'm not trying to draw out something that's not there. I'm trying to exaggerate what was there and is now forgotten. So if we take this diagnosis and then structure wise, just move into how you differently reacted to it, I think that's interesting. And that can trickle through, okay, kind of closest to furthest impact. You and your wife reaction is important. Your son's reaction is important. And then we get the kind of fallout from everybody else. How did they react? Did you lose friends? Did you keep friends? Did you figure out who really was willing to share their resources in ways of time and money with you on this huge challenge? That's interesting to me. The home transformed, it became a haven. Yep. So this is all of you dealing with the diagnosis, dealing with the home and changing that, navigating challenges. Again, this is doing an injustice, I think, to how difficult what you've done actually is. There were days when the world seems too loud for her. Kind of flying by again, kind of flying by that again. That's fine. This whole thing, I think, so everything after the diagnosis can probably roll into one section of how did we deal with it
Mm-hmm.
personally first, then how do we change our environment, then how do we manage others' experience with my daughter because they're never going to understand. I think so. Actually, now we have a good structure. It's opening scene where you're rolling down the road, diagnosis, reaction, personal, environmental changes, managing others. And then probably you can cap that off with a lesson, which I'm going to look for.
A plea for understanding?
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's it.
I think this is off. I think this is off the mark because I think the people who are going to read this And again, Zuli, what I'm finding interesting now is just how important this headline is ending up being, right? And we knew
Mm.
this from the start, but like, if I'm a person who does not have a child with autism, am I going to read something about my daughter's autism disease just for fun and curiosity? No, I'm not, right? Because it's not relevant to my life.
Mm-hmm.
But if this headline, let's take another take on it. Read this story before you meet someone with autism, or, well, no, that's, yeah, but something on that angle, something that drives the curiosity of, you may run into a person with autism in your life. No, no, no. You're going to do that. Here's how to deal with them.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the headline, of course, this can be the ending. Because this is a really good moral to that. This is a really good way. Like, this is a good way, theoretically, is a good way to understand it from the outside. And then your, kind of call to action is open your heart, embrace families who walk this path.
Although it looks like there was a second call to action just below.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So take us to educate yourself.
Yeah.
So is that, again, I'd ask, like, who is that aimed at? Is that aimed
Yeah.
at people who currently have a child, like, or have someone they love has got an autism diagnosis and they're like looking for support or resources? Or is it talking to people who have never experienced this as far as they know, and
Yep.
you're asking them to open their minds? Because I think that's two very different titles.
Yeah. And that's a choice that we can't really make.
Yeah, because ultimately we don't know who this is for.
Because we don't know. We don't know. And that, on that note, the thing I was going to jump back to is, if this headline here is something like, if I had seen my daughter's autism diagnosis for what it truly was, here's how I would tell the story.
That's interesting.
Now, all this
it all makes
beautiful stuff
sense.
makes total sense.
That's a great point. I was
still think
thinking even something
go
like,
ahead.
no, I was just thinking, like, if you do something like I wish I'd known what the day after my daughter's autism diagnosis would be like, something
Great.
like that. I don't know. So I guess, like, whoever was, I think a few people were asking about when to do titles. I think titles, actually thinking about it, kind of fit in between sandwiched rounds of editing, right? You go through the first thing and you're like, okay, this is who I'm talking to. This is what I'm trying to accomplish with this article. Revamp the title, then go through again and make sure that all my paragraphs, all my scenes fit. They talk to that title that I've just drafted. So I think, you never really finish with titles.
Yeah, and you know what's
do it
funny?
again.
Yeah, totally. We could slice this title 4 different ways and have 4 different ways of giving you feedback. I think what we've done here today is reinforce that fact. I think there are some good nuggets sprinkled in here and there, but as far as teaching, like, obviously this was a teardown. This wasn't a workshop top to bottom with no examples. But I think in my process, we're still on the point edit, because we're still trying to figure out what we're really trying to say. And that's why I keep going, like, hesitating on some of these edits, because as soon as you know which way you want to slice the story,
then you'll know, like, is this relevant? Should I keep this in? Actually, should I take it out? Absolutely.
Of course. I'm in the South. I get deli meat a lot. I get my turkey sliced at a 1. I get my bologna sliced at a 4. I don't want a bologna that's sliced at a 1 because it's too thick. So however you slice it is what you want to set the expectations for going forward. And I actually think that makes the entire rest of the editing process really simple.
Yeah.
Or simpler, because you know which way to slant everything.
So it sounds like we're kind of coming up to the end. I wanted to just quickly recap. I can't recap the whole thing. If you're just catching this now, go back and watch the whole thing because it was incredible.
Totally.
But these were kind of the headline takeaways that I would say came from this workshop. So first of all, I loved your 4-phase edit structure. I think you're right. You can't really do one and then the other. It makes sense to just have all 4 in mind as like categories of edits. So there's the pre-edit, which I'm going to be honest, I think the more time you spend in the pre-edit, which is thinking about what you want to write about, why, who you're writing it for, and to like force yourself to come up with more than just one thing, to stop yourself from just grabbing the first thing you want to write about. That as a pre-edit, I think is going to make your life as a writer much easier, much more enjoyable, and make the rest of the editing a lot faster. Then there's the point edit, which seems to be just answering one question. What is the one message I'm trying to drive home? So I think when you've got your draft, your first rough draft, it makes sense to think about like, okay, well, what am I trying to tell and to who? And oh yeah, you did actually tease that you had an exercise for that.
So I just thought about that. I was like, when you finish this, we're gonna do the exercise for how to pick one. So
go on. What was the? We'll pause for the exercise.
All right. Let me share this guy again and get us back to a blank document. Pause for exercise. The exercise is something I read in a book. Go figure, because that's how I learned everything in my life.
Old school.
Yeah, totally. YouTube videos, pish posh. Podcasts, don't need them. Books are the way. All right. So I read a book called Get to the Point, fittingly, by my Twitter friend, Joel Schwartzberg. Here it is. Of course, I have it back here. Looks like this. Great book. Highly recommend you purchase and read this book. The first exercise in the book is something he had to drill home to like long-winded executives. So Joel did a lot of work with political leaders and with like leaders of big corporations who were speaking to the press and speaking to their own people. And he said, okay, here's what we need to do. We need to create a statement that starts with the word I believe. As a blank here. So this actually fits really well, because what you want to do here is make a complete sentence that's compelling. If we put Victor's first thing in here, we go, I believe my daughter's autism diagnosis. This is not a complete sentence. This is a topic. If we go with the second one, whatever it was, I can't remember. Something like this. Also, not a complete sentence, not a belief. It's a topic, right? Because many people, right, they'll do this, Julie or Zuli, you know this, right? They'll be like, what do I want to write about today? Oh, I know. Right? You just end up with a topic. You don't end up with a firm guiding belief.
Mm-hmm.
But if we change this to... Now we have a sentence that can guide everything else that we do.
That's a great workshop exercise. So easy to do, and yet like super impactful. I can think of 5 articles I've written in the last year that would have really benefited from this.
Yeah, for sure. Because what it does, I mean, it gets you out of, it helps you define the criteria for what you're doing much better. And when you don't do that, you don't really know like if you've nailed it or not. It's hard to, then you have to like, and you can ask somebody to help find the way. You can come to me and Zuli, but what we're doing, as you know, most of the time is just trying to figure out which direction you're headed. And this I believe exercise is a really solid way to do that yourself. And of course, you know, once you get to the end, you go, do I really believe this? Because like, you know, Tim and myself, actually all content, I don't know why I keep going back to Tim, but all of us are trying to find a hot take that we can stand behind that is really believable and also really outlandish to say, right? Because it's like however outlandish you get is usually however many readers you get. And if you can back it up, or if you can you can deliver the sandwich, if you can deliver that peanut butter and pickle sandwich just like you promised, then man, big payoff, right? So the more you iterate on this I believe statement, you can kind of dial up the drama or dial it down or point it where you want it to go. And then you have to say, okay, well, do I really believe this? Because if you really don't write it. Don't write something you don't believe in.
Yeah. Back to the phases. So then on to phase 3, power edit, which I agree is definitely going to be the chunkiest, probably most challenging edit phase, especially for people who are new to it. So I think the one thing I took away from your power edit is that like your power edit suggestions. I think there's a lot you can do. You can learn about like literary perspectives and rhetorical devices that you can use in your writing. That's a lot of reading and a lot of homework. I think one of the, well, I'm not taking this from you. This is just my own personal experience.
Sure. Yeah.
A power edit for me is I read it out loud to myself, and I find that my ear, my external ear, is much better at catching. Like you were saying, a lot of those sentences were the same length. My internal ear doesn't catch that. My external ear really, really does. Because we're all used to hearing people talk. I think more even than some people are used to seeing sentences on a page and being like, oh, I like that sentence, I don't like that. So that's, I would say, the fastest way to power edit your own article. And thank you so much for submitting your article for consideration. Thanks, Victor. Thank you so much. Yeah, fantastic. And then finally, the proof edit. I agree. Outsource this to Grammarly.
Yeah. Done. Yeah. I mean, you could, back when I was writing on a newspaper, we didn't have Grammarly. It was just this far off vision of thing. We had spell check. That was pretty sweet. We actually did have some similar thing that was supposed to proofread, but it was garbage because, as it turns out, language is a pretty complicated thing to program into a machine. And we're even finding out this now, right? Like ChatGPT, I don't think is all the way there, but it's close. And that is a miracle of technology. But yeah, these days, if you want to proof it, throw it into Grammarly. Trying to decide if I'll open up this can of worms. I fight with Grammarly all the time because a lot of times it gives me advice that is just objectively grammatically wrong.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But I only know that because I'm the son of an English teacher who's been like indoctrinated into the cult of grammar, and that's my problem, not Grammarly's necessarily.
I think for most users, you can safely accept the vast majority of Grammarly's suggestions. That's what I do as the non-daughter of an English teacher, so a daughter of an accountant and a librarian.
Oh, that makes so much sense for you. It really does. No, I'm serious. I'm like, okay, yeah, I can see that.
Last, like outside of the phases, you had so many really great takeaways. So for your titles, I agree with you. Title and first paragraph probably should be 50% of the importance if you're weighing up what you're editing. Think about your title within the context. Who's reading it? Is it within an email? Is it on a platform where you're fighting against lots of noise? How tied is the title to you as a person versus the platform? Like, how much context do you need to give? You definitely want to look for places where you can add a little bit of contrast, go against the grain, give people a reason to click, add that curiosity gap. And I also really liked your pickles analogy. Think of the pickles. Give people what they expect. Don't stick a pickle in your article without warning. But if you do, make sure that you mention it in your title so that people who click on it will be pickle-loving enthusiasts. Amazing.
Totally.
I want to highlight your hack that I love / hate of writing the whole thing, leaving it for a day, coming back, reading it, and rewriting it. Makes me want to vomit. I have no doubt it would be highly effective. And then I just thought your constant kind of focus on tension is something that I, as a writer, have never thought about consciously, but it's so true. It's such a good point. You want to give people like all the best stories, like the fiction books that I read, none of them are happy. They all have friction. They all have tension. They all have a problem. And especially for nonfiction, I think it matters just as much. You have to think about like, well, why is somebody choosing to read this? There may be a problem that I've overcome, but I have to show them the journey. Otherwise, what's the point of them just reading my happy ending? So those were fantastic takeaways. Anything that you would add that I missed, Todd?
No, I think those are the big ones. Honestly, the best thing that you can do, I was trying to make this local to the workshop so I could like call back a certain takeaway. We talked about this a little. The single best thing you can do is be a reader. I mean, if you want to write better, just read more. That is the ultimate. Of course, you can study it, right? Like that's the, I guess, classroom way to do it. But the way to get a quote unquote feel for all these things, which a feel is just like repeated exposure to the same structures over and over again, is to just read. Like read what you want to write and then do that all the time. And then you become a little nerd like me. And it's a wonderful place.
All right. Thank you, everybody, so much for coming to this workshop. Todd, I always have a great time chatting to you. And I feel like we just had a nice chance to have an hour and 20-minute conversation. And that's always fun for me. So thank you all for coming here and watching us converse. It's been so fun and I learned a lot. So hopefully everybody watching this has as well. If you're watching this on replay, definitely feel free to email me any questions, or you can leave a comment in the YouTube channel. I try to answer my comments about once a week. And if there's anything that's beyond my reach, I will hand it over to Todd. Thank you so much again. See you all in the next video. Before I let you all go, though, Todd, where can people find more of your incredible insights and expertise?
Oh, sure. Probably best thing to do is go to toddbrison.com and put your name in the form at the top. Give me your email address. I send emails. I've actually started doing it every day now, which seems like a lot, but I keep it short. And
Depends how good the email is.
Yeah, exactly. That's the goal right now, is more emails. So pop in. I will not spam you. You get good emails from me. That's the thing. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Victor. Thanks again for submitting your article. And thank you, everybody, for watching. See you all in the next video, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks all. Thank you, Zuli.